Lep pozdrav vsem skupaj, me veseli, da ste se zbrali. Začel bomo s čisto kratko predstavitvijo našega predavatelja in njegove teme. Potem bo predavatelj kakšno uro govoril, na koncu bo seveda ostal še čas za vprašanja. Torej, Balint Varga je znanstveni sodelavec na Inštitutu za zgodovino Madžarske akademije znanosti. Študiral je na diplomskem nivoju v Budimpešti in potem v Heidelbergu, potem magistriral na Srednjeevropski univerzi in doktoriral v Nemčiji na univerzi v Mainzu. Potem je bil podoktorski štipendist Marie Curie v Bratislavi in pa tudi štipendist Godstiverjeve fundacije spet v Budimpešti. Doslej je izdal nekaj člankov, predvsem pa knjigo v angleščini The Monumental Nation, Magyar Nationalism and Symbolic Politics in Fantasy of Hungary leta 2016. Knjiga je doživela zelo lep odziv, recenzije so bile zelo pohvaljene v veliki večini in dobila je tudi nagrado Richard G. Plaška Avstrijske akademije znanosti. V začetku svoje kariere se je torej ukvarjal predvsem za družbeno in kulturno zgodovino nacionalizma, v zadnjem času pa razvija svoj nov projekt, ki se ukvarja z globalizacijo, to tako imenovano prvo globalizacijo v času pred Prvo svetovno vojno v prostoru Habsburške monarhije oziroma celo širše vzhodne, srednje Evrope. Govoril bo danes v predavanju o temi, ki jo je obširneje obdelal v svoji knjigi. Skratka, o eni zanimivi epizodi iz konca 19. stoletja, ko madžarska država znotraj vojne monarhije poskuša na različne načine nacionalizirati prebivalstvo, obnaša se torej kot neka nationalizing state in en izmed načinov je tudi ta izgradnja ogromnih spomenikov v okolici različnih mest na tedanjem Ogrskem. Seveda ga tukaj ne bodo zanimali prvenstveno spomeniki kot nek umetnostno-zgodovinski izdelek, ampak širše okoliščine postavljanja teh spomenikov, odziv lokalne skupnosti in tako naprej. Toliko v tej kratki predstavitvi. Na eno stvar bi še vendarle opozoril. Kot sem rekel, je Balint raziskovalec na Inštitutu za zgodovino Madžarske akademije znanosti, zato bi vas rad v tej priložnosti upozoril tudi na precej nezavidljivo situacijo, v kateri se ta trenutek nahaja Madžarska akademija znanosti. Morda ste o tem kaj že brali, če niste, se o tem informirajte, to so stvari, ki so vendarle relevantne tudi za širšo akademsko okolje. Preden končam, bi se rad zahvalil še soorganizatorki Beti Žerovc z Oddelka za umetnostno zgodovino. Tema se je zdela taka zanimiva, da dobra priložnost za povezati oba oddelka in to sva nekako zgrabila. Še enkrat hvala za vse sodelovanje. Vsem kolegicam, ki ste danes prišle, pa bi seveda želel lep dan žena, predvsem pa seveda čim boljši položaj tudi v ostalem delu leta. Balint.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rock and Betty, for the invitation and the chance to talk to this distinguished audience, their colleagues, their friends. Today I will give you a short summary of the book which Rock just mentioned. I will divide this talk into three parts. First, I will give you a general overview of the context, so how Hungary in the late 19th century looked like, with a particular focus on nationalism. In the second part of the paper, I will talk about the development of symbolic politics in late 19th century Hungary in general. In the third part of my talk, I will focus on one particular project within the framework of a large series of commemorations. So, Hungary in the late 19th century was the most diverse polity, or province if you like, in the Habsburg monarchy in terms of religions and vernaculars. With the exception of Islam, which was limited only to Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Hungary you could find all the religions of the Habsburg monarchy. And quite many languages were also present. This density of heterogeneity was just not known in any other province of the Habsburg monarchy. The Hungarian government didn't really like this situation at all, and this is quite a euphemism. You are certainly aware of how Austria by that time worked. Austria, I mean the Cisleitanian part of the Habsburg monarchy, was on the imperial level a non-nationalizing state with an agenda of maintaining the multicultural society. I know that on the local level, provincial level, if you take the example of Carinthian Slovenes, then you may find some other policies, but the imperial policy in Austria was absolutely for a non-nationalizing agenda. Now in Hungary that was quite a different idea of how to go on with this diversity. Hungary was a nationalizing state from the compromise of 1867 until practically the Second World War. Liberalism and Magyar ethnic nationalism coexisted and governed the country at the same time, and there was a delicate balance between liberalism and nationalism. These two sometimes reinforced each other, sometimes were at odds. In the early period, if these two principles collided, it was mostly liberalism which was given preference. But from the late 19th century, liberal ideas were increasingly consecrated at the altar of nationalism, and Hungary became much more nationalistic and much less liberal than it used to be after the compromise. So the major problem of Hungarian policymakers was how to make the nation and state congruent. And here I use the terminology of Ernst Gader, who writes about these congruence and policies of making these two phenomena congruent. Another, putting it in a different way, how to make peasants into Magyars. So this is now, here I'm referring to the seminal work of Eugène Weber, whose Peasants into Frenchmen, published in the 1970s, is still a very important piece on nationalism history. In this very important work, Weber claimed that peasantry in France became actually consciously French around 1900, and there were three important policies which facilitated this change: army, education, and railway, or more broadly understood, the economic integration of the country. Now, if we apply these three into Hungary, we see that this hardly worked. Army, well, there was a little Hungarian army, but most of the conscripts were drafted into the common Austro-Hungarian army, where the language of command was German, and the identity it fostered was imperial and dynastical loyalty, unlike in France, whose army was school of Republican patriotism. Okay, education. Well, in the sector of tertiary education, so universities and colleges, Magyar was the only language in which these schools operated. And all these schools were under the direct governance of the Ministry of Education. Secondary education level, there Magyar was the dominant language, but there used to be some German, Romanian, and even a Serbian high school. And they actually were pretty autonomous because they were run by the churches. And on the elementary school level, well, surprisingly, these schools were not nationalized. Elementary schools were mostly run by church congregations, including the Romanian and Serbian Orthodox churches, the Romanian Greek Catholic Church, and the Lutheran Church in Transylvania, which was a German institution. And their agenda was not exactly the same as that of the nationalizing Magyar-Hungarian state. They had a pretty wide autonomy how to instruct the students, even though the government actually increased its control over education, but still elementary education went in vernaculars of the local students. By the end of the period, the ratio of Magyar schools actually increased, but still most of the students could attend the schools in their own languages. So this, and the curriculum which they taught was on the one hand, centralized. On the one hand, instructions were given by the ministry. On the other hand, we know from research on a local level that schoolmasters could actually turn this curriculum to meet their own needs, and some of them actually taught ideas which were quite contrary to the ideas developed in Budapest at the Ministry of Education. So education didn't really work to make peasants into Magyars if we compare that to France or Germany, Imperial Germany. What about railway and economy? Well, here the problem is the same as with army. Hungarian national economy did exist, but it was part of the Austro-Hungarian and also the global economy. The money was same Austrian-Hungary, the national bank, so the bank which issued this money was located in Vienna. The tariff policies were the same, so one hardly can talk about a Hungarian national economy per se. For these reasons, symbolic politics became an important element in nationalizing policy, and now I'm entering the second part of my talk. However, until the last years of the 19th century, government-driven symbolic politics in Hungary was mostly confined to the coronation, to public funerals, and such intangible phenomena. But not even that was very successful. A national holiday sanctioned by law was introduced as late as in 1898, so at the very end of this period. Before that, some middle-class associations in towns and cities celebrated the 15th of March. That was the day when the revolution in 1848 broke out. But these celebrations were not sanctioned by the state because, as you know, the March Revolution in 1848 developed into an anti-Habsburg war, so it was a very problematic thing in the Austro-Hungarian framework. On the other hand, the Catholic Church also had quite large celebrations on the 20th of August each year. That's the day of St. Stephen, the first monarch of Hungary back in the 11th century, which was celebrated by all the Catholics as a national saint. However, as you can recall from the first chart, Catholics only made up half of the population of the country, and the other half was just not interested in any commemoration of a Catholic saint. Furthermore, there were hardly any public monuments in Hungary by the late 19th century. A dozen of monuments, national monuments, stood in the national capital Budapest. They were mostly initiated and financed by middle-class donors and the city itself. But the provinces were practically empty. This meant that Hungary lagged behind the German statue mania of the age, and even behind Bohemia, whose townscapes were quite different at the time. Bohemian German-speaking towns of Bohemia were practically full with statues to Joseph II, and that was so popular that so in Bohemia by that time, statues dedicated to Emperor Joseph II were so popular that some factories actually manufactured these statues. There were also catalogs, and you could order a statue for your town from a catalog. So it worked like Amazon today without the online communication part, but it was practically the same. You could see how much money you have, and you can opt for a little Joseph II, a large one, even larger one, whatsoever. In Hungary, that was not the case. Hungarian cities were practically empty. As the 19th century was to terminate, more and more people, mostly of course politicians and intellectuals, asked questions concerning these issues. We shall carve a past into the Hungarian provinces, shouldn't we? But who shall carve that past into the provinces? And what past exactly shall we carve there? Who shall be the audience? And who shall pay for this undertaking? This is much more expensive than having a school festivity or church festivity. Even a small Joseph II costed much more than a school holiday which lasted for a few hours. The occasion which finally gave a chance to populate Hungary with tangible objects of commemoration was the so-called millennial, a series of large-scale celebrations which took place in the year 1896. These celebrations commemorated the 1000th anniversary of a historic event, the so-called conquest, or honfoglalás, or landbezitsname, during which, in the late 9th century, Magyar tribes, under the Prince Arpad, had left their that-time homeland in what is in today Ukraine and moved westwards to the territory what is today Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and the northern Serbia. What is sure that these ancient Magyars found some local inhabitants in these territories. Certainly some Slavs, perhaps some Romanians, that's a tricky question. And what exactly the encounter looked like between the Magyars and the local inhabitants was absolutely unclear. There is and now we have to go, to understand this phenomenon, we have to go into the history of historical discipline a little bit. There is a chronicle written in the 12th century called Gesta Hungarorum, the deeds of the Hungarians, written by a person whose name we don't know, hence it is called anonymous. And this chronicle claims that the ancient Magyars entered the territory that became later Hungary, they met there the Slavs and the Romanians, and they fought a series of battles, and of course Magyars won all of these battles, and then from that point on, the Magyars became the undisputable leaders of the country. The problem is that it turned out exactly by that time, so in the 1870s and 1880s, that this chronicle is kind of bullshit. It just does not correspond to facts which are claimed in other chronicles of that time. So if you critique, the most fashionable historical method of that time, developed by Leopold von Ranke from Berlin. So if you apply critique to this source, then you will understand that this could not take place in the way as it is written. Its author just, he liked stories and he invented stories on his own. This is beyond question. The problem is that there are no other sources which would detail the story. So in fact, when these millennial celebrations took place, no one actually knew how this took place. No one actually knew who actually entered, who they found there, what happened there. But what is sure that a century later, a Catholic kingdom of Hungary was created. And this was created under the leadership of the offspring of the conquest leaders, namely by a certain guy called Stephen, who became the first Catholic king of this newly forged monarchy, and who became canonized a few decades later. So, in 1896, this rather dim event was commemorated, the conquest. This was a new phenomenon. The conquest had never been celebrated before. Commemorating medieval events became a quite common practice in late 19th century Europe, because the Middle Ages were the crucial period of study for historians, and also the wider public regarded the origins and the foundations of the state as crucial and determining events for the present. But, lacking antecedents to the commemoration of the conquest, a new tradition had to be forged, so a tradition had to be invented. But this invention was challenged by two elements. First, until the advent of nationalism, intellectual life in Hungary was largely dominated by Catholic-Protestant controversy. In this case, the role of Stephen and Arpad are important. Who was the real founder of Hungary? The nomadic horseman, pagan tribe leader Arpad, who actually fought Christian polities? Or his offspring, the first official king, Stephen, who was canonized and venerated by the Hungarian Catholic Church? The problem is that until the late 19th century, Stephen's massive Catholic cult prevented Protestants to appreciate him fully. Therefore, Protestant authors tended to argue for Arpad's pivotal role and of the nomad Magyars. The second issue is what I just explained, the struggle between Romantic historians and positivist historians. Since the conquest could be narrated in the easiest and the most comprehensive way by relying on this text, the Gesta Hungarorum, one could apply a romantic Magyar national mythology upon, in which the Magyars conquered all other groups of Hungary by force, and this is a legitimate legitimate argument why in the present the Magyars should rule their country. The problem is that the accuracy of this text was contested and it could not be replaced by anything else. However, the Hungarian political elite was smart enough to create a narrative disregarding the small and contradictory details. Both Arpad and Stephen and even Francis Joseph were utilized for the narrative. Both Arpad and Stephen were given the role of state founders. The contradictory details provided actually a sort of flexibility. It provided a chance if at organizers of festivities, speakers and artists, and any other memory engineer could adjust their acts in accordance with the actual audience. So the lesson is very simple. If you do public history and you want to commemorate something whose details are not really known, this gives you actually a chance because you won't be disturbed by facts, by hard facts. You have the chance to interpret things as free as you can because there are so little facts which we know about. So, their Hungarian memory engineers, intellectuals and politicians elaborated a narrative, and this narrative reinforced and actually made large-scale celebrations possible and even a must. It is quite stunning reading middle-class documents from the 1880s and 1890s that people, local intellectuals, priests, lawyers, whomever, just demanded the government to engage into the millennium, to have festivities for the first time in the country at nationwide level, and to celebrate Hungary's glorious 1,000 years. So this actually took place because everyone was practically content, at least everyone who had a say in politics. In 1896, celebrations larger in scale than ever before were held throughout Hungary. Their aim was to show the state doctrine, the so-called Hungarian state idea, a mixture of liberal and minor nationalist ideas to the widest possible audience, in order to create, or if already created, strengthen the loyalty to and identification with Hungary and the Hungarian nation. The central enterprise was an exhibition whose poster you can see in the left corner and the scene on the right corner. This exhibition, which was put in the city park behind this statue, which was also built for this purpose, featured a historical, ethnographical, modern technological, and an amusement section, and 3 million tickets were sold. In a country of like 60 and 70 million people, this is, I believe, a very high number. Of course, we can assume that several people, mostly from the capital, went there several times because of the amusement features, but still, this was a huge success on a mass level. There were also some infrastructure projects, museums, public buildings, bridges, whatever were built, and each school and church congregation were ordered by the government to have commemorations, and also quite many associations. Practically all the municipalities commemorated somehow the millennial year. These were carried out by local actors with quite different agendas, and it's quite interesting to see how a local agenda and the national agenda meet and what interaction actually they produce. Most of these governmental efforts actually were limited to Budapest. So in the provinces it was mostly local actors who did this job. But there was one major exception, and by that I will enter the third part of my talk. 7 monuments were built at the peripheries of the country, organized and financed by the government only. And I will talk now about these 7 monuments. And I'm not a great expert on how to use Google Maps, so I could not get by Google Maps a historic map. So you have to imagine now the borders of Hungary. In the middle of the country, of course, see Budapest, the capital, and the 7 light blue signs show the location of 7 monuments. Do I have a pointer here? No. No, okay, no pointer. So please follow my instructions. At Bratislava, exactly on that time Austro-Hungarian border, stands a castle called Ljubljana. It is exactly on the border of right now Slovakia and Austria. By that time it was the Austro-Hungarian border. First monument was built there. The second one, a little bit to the west, the northeast, that is a town called Nitra. It is an average-sized town in today West Slovakia. Yeah, that's Nitra, quite close to the, by that time, Moravian-Hungarian border here in the northern part of the country. We go east, we encounter Mukachevo, today in Ukraine. That's an average-sized town in the western part of Ukraine. By that time, it was practically on the Hungarian-Galician border. We go further to the south, we see Brasov, right now in the very middle of Romania, by that time on the Romanian-Hungarian border. Even more border-like is Zemun, which is right now a district of Belgrade. By that time, it used to be a little town within the Kingdom of Hungary, but in fact on Croatian soil. So it was in Srijem County of Croatia. If we go a little bit to the north, this is Pusztaszer in the middle of the nowhere. The Hungarian. I will explain why this is in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, near to the town Szeged in South Hungary. And the last one is this. This is a Benedictine monastery called Pannonhalma on the western part of the country. So, some monuments initiated by Kálmán Tali, a historian who started as a romantic historian and then ended up as a neo-romantic historian. And he was also a politician and a member of the Academy of Sciences, a classic liberal Magyar nationalist historian and politician, whose work was contested by his time because he didn't really familiarize himself with the rank-and-file methods, but his romantic ideas made him extremely popular with the larger public. So he chose 7 locations, and he was practically the project manager. The government told him, and this was a nice dialogue. Tali, the historian, said, "Look, I'm one of the few historians who is also a politician, so I have the expertise how to commemorate a historic event. I want to expand the governmental action to the provinces, give me the chance." And the government said, "Okay, you got the chance, you can do whatever you want, here's your budget, just do the job." And he was practically a quite authoritative person. He did not consult with anyone, and he ignored all other initiatives which came from whatever side. He chose all the locations, and I will explain you why these locations were chosen for quite a variety of reasons. 5 were on the borders and 2 in the center, and I will tell you why this distribution was made. These were built in a highly diverse environment. You see that practically all the languages spoken in Hungary are somehow present in the environment of these monuments. Also, all the religions are somehow present, even the different divisions within Judaism. So, liberal modern Judaism or Hasidim Judaism are present. And I will tell you a little bit, when talking about the monuments themselves, I will explain you the reasons in more detail. So, on the one hand, we have these highly diverse environments. On the one hand, we have an absolutely homogeneous message. The message was the same at all locations. It was reinforced by the symbols of the monuments themselves, which you will see in a few seconds. And also the way how the festivities were organized is the same at all the locations. The message was clear: the ancient Magyars conquered this territory by force. They established a state there. The Genuine population accepted the Magyar leadership, and Magyars were champions of tolerance because they tolerated the various peoples as long as the Magyar primacy was not contested. So there was a clear lesson from the past, which was applied to the present, and no other concerns were to taken into consideration. The monuments were planned by rather mediocre artists, commissioned by the government, and these monuments conveyed this message. The location represented the unitary territory of a nation. You see that the 5 of the monuments practically encircle the Hungarian territory. The figures, inscriptions, coat of arms, and carvings all carried symbols associated with the ancient Magyars. The telling side of this one-sidedness came from Brașov in Romania. Even Tallinn was absolutely aware of the fact that locating a monument commemorating the Magyar conquest there was historical nonsense. The ancient Magyars certainly did not enter that part of Transylvania. That was clear to everyone. Indeed, Brașov was a traditional stronghold of the ethnic group called Transylvanian Saxons, who migrated there in the High Middle Ages from Germany and spoke a German vernacular even by that time. The city was still firm in the hand of local Saxons. So a local initiative came from a Saxon councilman to include some Saxon signs on the monument to represent not only the ethnic Magyars whose ancestors did not enter the city, but to combine this ethnic Magyar narrative with the locally significant group, the Saxons. No avail, his initiative was obviously rejected. Tallinn even disregarded local initiatives which were not associated with the Saxons or any other minority groups, but with Magyar middle classes. These initiatives concerned the exact location and the shape of the monuments, but to no avail, this person knew much better than the locals what should be done. So, in summer and early autumn of 1896, the monuments, or better said, the monuments to be, because they were not ready yet, because of lack of time and bad management, were inaugurated. And these inauguration festivities were an extreme challenge to the local public, more precisely to the local middle classes, because these were small cities. The largest one, Bratislava, by that time had some 70,000 inhabitants, Munkácsy or Nitra some 20,000. Middle classes were small, they knew each other, and it was expected to be there, or to do something. And it was quite painful for people who did not appreciate these ideas what to do. And you can see a variety of strategies how to cope with this challenge. Not in this case, but in a different case, I read a government report claiming that in a little town in what is today in Slovakia, there was a local lawyer. He was a Slovak nationalist. And exactly on the day of the local millennial festivities, he made a day trip with his family to Vienna. And that was his way of get out. It's written in the records that this, by the wording of the time, notorious pan-Slav, that was the Hungarian wording for Slovak nationalism, the notorious pan-Slav lawyer Stefanovic made a day trip to Vienna, and this was his sign of boycott. So somehow they had to react, and let's go now one by one what happened to them. So Castle David, this is the castle ruins, that river is the Danube, and that's over there, their monument. This castle is approximately 10 kilometers from the downtown of Bratislava, which is quite important. It represented the Austro-Hungarian border. And it was not contested by anyone, because I think because of its peripheral location. One could say in Bratislava that it's not our business. If we don't like it, it's not our business, because it is not in the city center. The local middle classes were Magyar and German speaking both Christian and Jewish, and they were absolutely loyal to Hungary, though they maintained a German tradition of Bildung and culture quite strongly. I will talk about it in a second. This monument did not trigger significant enthusiasm, but it was not contested either. It became a quite neutral object on the periphery of the city. The city practically accepted it, but it did not really internalize. But the city's German and Magyar-speaking liberal middle class did not consider it enough a contribution, a proper contribution. And next year, they built a monument in the downtown to commemorate Queen Mary Theresia. That is what you can see on the right side. This latter monument was carved by János Fadrusz, by that time a young but already acclaimed sculptor, and costed some 3 times more money. It was made of Carrara marble, unlike this state-sponsored one, which was built from some quite average material. And the artistic quality of the Queen Mary Theresia monument was beyond question much better than the state-sponsored one. So what happened is that within 2 years, 2 monuments were set up practically in the same place. And the latter one, which was initiated by the locals, became the monument which represented the local values best. Instead of stressing the border between Austria and Hungary, the Queen Mary Theresia monument commemorated the Habsburg monarch, under whose reign the city actually flourished. That was one of the golden ages of Bratislava. And there is one more thing. When Mary Theresia came to the throne in 1740, a war broke immediately out. That was the War of Austrian Succession. Mary Theresia was in a very weak position, and she went to Bratislava to meet the Hungarian parliament. And there she made a quite dramatic entree. According to the stories, carried his young son, the future Joseph II, and asked the support of the Magyar nobleman. And the Magyar nobleman, because they are noble, they agreed, and they practically provided the Habsburg monarchy with an army which saved the Habsburgs. So, and this important proverb, vitam et sanguinem, vidam, so we offer our blood and our life, said the Hungarian nobility to the queen. This is written there. So this is a perfect combination of loyalties. Loyalty to the Habsburg monarchy, loyalty to the country, and of course, this is a German-speaking dynasty, so also German culture could be somehow taken into this combination. That became the symbol of the city actually, and not this one on the periphery, which represented a border, which was more meaningless for the Bratislava audience. The next one, in Nitra, was a message to the Slovaks. According to this dubious chronicle of the 12th century, a certain prince, Zobor, was killed by the Hungarians, by the ancient Magyars, and there is still a hill next to the town called Zobor. And guess where the Hungarian monument was built? Exactly on this hill, which was quite the rude message to the locals. So if you don't accept my rule, you will be executed. However, it was not contested by the local Slovak population for a very simple reason. Local Slovaks were workers and artisans, so culture was practically attached, so language was practically attached to social status. In this town, middle classes spoke by that time Magyar, and the lower classes spoke rather Slovak. And in this hegemonic world of the middle class liberalism, these Slovak-speaking workers and artisans had quite no say in political and cultural matters. However, it was contested into the local Catholic clergy. Nitra is a bishopric seat, so it has a bishop, canon with a lot of, and a seminary, and a Catholic high school with a lot of Catholic clergymen. And that was the most conservative part. This northwestern part of Hungary was the most conservative part of Hungarian Catholicism. And the Catholics were quite upset by that time, because the Hungarian Kulturkampf practically took place in the previous years. So, in 1894-95, Judaism was given the same rank as Catholicism. And divorce became possible for everyone, because the civic marriage was introduced. And the Catholic clergy was extremely upset. So what happened that they did not contest the monument itself, but they boycotted, Catholics practically boycotted, Catholic clergy practically boycotted the festivity. And the local Catholic papers delivered extremely angry and rude articles how these bloody Jewish-supported Hungarian liberals are about to usurp great national thing for their liberal agenda. So the Kulturkampf actually did not stop, and it even influenced these millennial festivities. In the next 20 years, no local response in terms of monuments was given, so in Nitra, no other monument was built. This remained the only large one, but since it was built not in the city but on a hill nearby, it was also quite unimportant for the public space in the city. If we go to the east, we arrive at Mukachevo, where the monument is over there. You see again an obelisk with the ancient Magyar's bird called Turul, whatever. And this is a castle built in the early, I think perhaps in the Middle Ages, and then it was a quite important castle in the early modern ages. By that time it was a prison, so the prison was removed, and this monument was built here. Local Magyar middle class, of course, was quite happy with this. What is interesting is that also the local Ruthenian, or if you like Ukrainian, but I'm not happy with this term by that time. So the local Ruthenian elite also endorsed the festivities, because they anyway subscribed for Magyar nationalism in exchange for modernity. So the business model was quite obvious. Hungarian government actually offered modernity in change of Magyarization, and the local Greek Catholic clergy, Ruthenians are mostly Greek Catholics, so the Greek Catholic clergy actually subscribed for this idea. They accepted, okay, we wanted to have modernity, this was an extremely backward region of the country, and for that we will smoothly turn into Magyar patriots. Problem, however, arose here as well, and this time from the Hasidic Jewry. Approximately 50% of this town was populated by Jews, and these were extremely conservative Hasidic Jews. Unlike their peers in Bratislava or in Budapest, they just ignored modernity or state regulations or anything like that. They were nationally indifferent. They had quite many conflicts with the town council because of their strange customs and indifference towards the modern way of life. I'll just give you one example. There is a Jewish custom, a Hasidic custom. This is a practice which is practically a trick on Shabbat, on Saturday. You know, on Saturday, a Jew shall not do anything which is associated with working. But in the Talmud, there is a kind of exception that if you are in a courtyard, you are able and you are permitted to do things. So what they did on each Friday, that around well, it's not a ghetto, but around the district they lived, they practically set up a fence on the streets to encircle their district, and this was a trick which enabled them to carry things on Shabbat. Now the town council was absolutely upset because they thought this is a medieval custom, something stupid, something irrational. Furthermore, it is dangerous because, for instance, if there is fire, then it will prevent a fireman from doing their job. And they just could not stop this practice. And then, what happened, it was an extreme misfortune probably, that the inauguration festivity actually fell on a major Jewish holiday. On a holiday called Tisha B'Av, which forbids Jewish people from joy and from anything which is associated with happiness, because this is a holiday of mourning. Now, a millennial festivity should have been a celebration of 1,000 years of glory. And most of the Jews, of course, they had to make a decision whether to go to the national holiday to celebrate a thing, an achievement, or to stay in their homes and to mourn their Jewish tradition. And of course, they did the latter one. And they also quarreled with who shall represent the congregation in front of the minister who visited the celebration. And and all the Hungarian press and the government reports were extremely angry and disappointed why these Hasidic Jews again cannot act as modern civilized people who go and celebrate such a great achievement. But with the Christian population, it went quite okay, so both the Hungarians and the Ruthenian middle classes were happy. And this happiness can be seen by the picture on the right side. That picture, it represents a model. This is a model which was never turned into a proper monument, but the local town council wanted to have its own monument as well, because, such as in the case of Bratislava, they were unhappy with the location because the castle was too peripheral. They wanted something in the downtown, and something which was done by themselves. And they chose, this is a figure of Arpad, Prince Arpad himself. And this is the only case of these 7 when the local elite said, okay, we want to have the same message, but a little bit reconfigured in the downtown. So the fact that they were happy with the message of the millennial monument it showed that they also wanted to have their own millennial monument in the practically with the same message. They didn't have enough money because this is a poor and little town, but the idea was there. If we go now to the south and we arrive at Brasov, we see that this is the monument which was built again on a hilltop above the city. It is identical with the one which was built in Bratislava, so in Děčín, showing the 2 very opposite parts of the country, that this is the same, even the monuments which guard the borders are the same. And as I said earlier, the only reason to locate this monument there was just genuine nationalism. It was absolutely ahistorical, only to remind local Saxon and Romanians of Magyar rule. No surprise, and it was not surprise for the government either, that the local Romanians practically completely boycotted the process, and the local Saxons were divided. They absolutely disliked the monument, but this was a very pragmatic group of people, and they cooperated with the government because they had some great negotiating skills, and practically they said that we will not subscribe for German nationalism, but we want to keep our Lutheran local regional identity. And since they were a very modern group, they had very high schooling and education level, and their economic performance was much better than anyone in the region. So they said that, okay, we'll practically play according to the rules of the Hungarian government if we can do our business on our own. And so this compromise worked for several decades, and the local Saxons had to make a decision how to interpret this, and the minority actually joined the Romanians to boycott. The majority said that we really dislike this idea, but we have to somehow tolerate it because our cooperation with the government is more important, that we are not really harassed by more tangible policies. We can somehow live with this monument. What happened that 2 years later, they had the same reaction. Johannes Honterus was a very important theologian in the 16th century. He went to Germany. He was from Russia. He went to Germany. He made friendship with Philip Melanchthon and other theologians of the Lutheran Reformation. He returned to Transylvania and he introduced Lutheranism to Brasov and Transylvanian Saxons in the 16th century. And he was also an erudite intellectual, so perfect person to commemorate. 2 years after the millennium, this monument was built. It was carved by a quite well-known German sculptor, from Germany by that time. And again, the contradiction between the two. This one was built on a hilltop. It was an ahistorical monument. It tried to rule the city. This one on the right was built in the very middle of the town. In fact, the building behind is the Black Church. That's a Gothic church built in the 13th century. This is the main Lutheran Church of the town. And it represents a figure whose historical significance is beyond question, and it was financed by the Saxon Church practically, and Saxon congregations and associations. If you go now to the west, to Zemun, that was for some reasons the most strange among all of them. It was built on Croatia. So, you know, Croatia was kind of part of Hungary, but still autonomous. Hungary had a limit, the Hungarian government had a limited say in Croatian matters, but it had a say. And this location had absolutely nothing to do with conquest. It was beyond question that they're not even anonymous in this Hungary mentions this town at all. There were two reasons why to locate this monument here. First, this represented the Serbian border. In fact, the border of the Danube is already Belgrade, and there probably you can find Belgrade. In fact, you can see now from this hilltop, you can see Belgrade right now. And it was also a message to Croats that it should be a representation of Hungarian-Croatian friendship, as imagined by this Kálmán Tali, this notorious Magyar nationalist. Of course, the Zagreb newspapers were absolutely pissed off how the Magyars dared to build a monument to commemorate their conquest on Croatian soil. But still, the government was in a position enough to do this monument, and the local reaction is quite interesting as well. This town was inhabited by Catholic Croats, Serbian Orthodox, some other Orthodox, and Germans. The Germans were indifferent, they were peasants, mostly living in one outskirts. They were peasants and they did not really care about politics. They mostly supported the government. Also, the Croats mostly supported the government, and indeed the mayor of the town was a Serbian Orthodox person, but he supported the monument for a very simple reason. This was a small town on the border exactly next to Belgrade. It lived actually on long trade commerce. And it just needed the benevolence of the government. And the city's golden days were already over, because in the 18th and early 19th century, merchants had to stop there because of the Ottoman Habsburg frontier. They had to stop there, and it became a major trading hub. But it lost its significance. And this town was lobbying at the Hungarian government to get some infrastructure projects. So they needed the benevolence of the Hungarian government, and since trade and business were practically done by Budapest, even in Hungary, because the Hungarian-Croatian compromise practically gave economic matters to the Hungarian government and not the Croatian one. Because by that time the Croats didn't understand the importance of money for political matters. This little town had to support, in this particular case, the Hungarian authorities. So the pragmatic local town council actually supported the acquisition of the territory of this monument and the building project. Of course, some Croatian and Serbian nationalists, both locally and in Zagreb and other places, were outraged, but they did tolerate this monument. One more reason why they tolerated it was a historical reason. When the Ottomans first tried to conquer Belgrade in 1456, if I'm not wrong, John Hunyadi, by that time governor of Hungary and military commander, started the battle exactly from here. And he was a local hero for both Serbs and Croats and Hungarians, because this is the person who fought the Ottomans in the 15th century. And locals actually remember this battle very well. This formed a very important local myth. And also this John Hunyadi, or Jan Sidinjanko, if it is perhaps this name tells you more in Serbian version, died either here or in Belgrade, this is unclear, but he died after the battle. And so he can be associated with this town pretty well, And these are actually the ruins of a little castle which stood there in the Middle Ages. So one can assume that the John Millennium was there, so it has some historical significance, and locals practically started to call this monument not as the Millennial Monument, but a monument dedicated to him. And this was the reason why it could be accepted much easier than monuments at other locations. A local response in terms of monuments was made here as well. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that. That was a little bust of Francis Joseph. So, a commemoration of the actual Habsburg ruler. That was still, since this town was on the military frontier, and you know this military frontier zone, which stretched from Zemun to Croatia, was pretty loyal to the emperor. This Francis Joseph cult is nothing but surprising. Okay, and then two more. The last one, monastery in Pannonhalma is an age-old Benedictine monastery. It was founded by Stephen back in the late 10th century. And is a very important place of Hungarian history. So why to locate here something which venerated pagan Hungarians, pagan Magyars who fought actually Catholics? Well, this is the case which I referred in the previous part of the talk, that if you have, that you can combine several traditions if you talk to different audiences. So the Minister of Culture who actually inaugurated this monument next to the monastery rarely mentioned Arpad and the pagan Magyars first, and then he just immediately switched to the Catholic story, and then developed a narrative centered on the Catholic history of the country. And of course, this is the #1 Catholic location. The Benedictine monks were far more liberal than the Catholic clergy in North Hungary. So they did not really care about the Kulturkampf. They were happy to accept this monument. But the monument remained insignificant. This is, well, not a big deal, honestly. 200 meters from that, you have one of the most important historical building structures in Hungary at all. And that's the thing. This is, even today, it is absolutely on the periphery, no one ever cares. Literally, if you go there, you can visit the monastery, and it's really a great experience, and no one even goes there because it is normally locked. This is important. If you go to Pusztaszer, to the very south, this is west side, it's in the middle of nowhere. It is in the middle of nowhere, on the Hungarian Puszta. The reason why it was located here is, again, in this dubious chronicle of the 12th century. The chronicle claimed that the ancient Magyars, after conquering all the country, met here in the middle of the Puszta and established their constitution. And since then, Hungary has been a constitutional nation, impaired with England, whose constitutional tradition goes back to the Middle Ages. Again, the problem is here that no other source ever claimed this assembly having taken place. So most likely this did not happen. However, there was already a very widely acclaimed myth and tradition of the ancient constitution of the Magyars. So here a monument was dedicated. Probably the most awkward of all of them. Just look at, so we are talking about a monument dedicated to pagan and non-Christian nomadic horsemen. Now you have a Greek structure here, and this little guy should be Arpad. The ratios are not really good, and he's sitting on the Greek structure. Even contemporaries thought that paganic horsemen should not sit on a Greek monument, but still, this is what was built here in the middle of nowhere, and the problem was that this is a structure, but there is no human environment. So, people from Szeged and a nearby town came to the inauguration. They were very happy because that's one of the few regions of Hungary which used to be, and it still is, only Magyar-speaking. And they were actually quite happy with this myth carved into stone in this location. The problem was that they could not really use this for anything because there is nothing in the environment. So there were some ideas that a village should be built there, but this failed. And in the next 20-30 years, this monument was used only once in a year. They organized a festival there. They went there, had some food, they returned to Szeged, but it became quite unimportant. So, short summary. Monuments celebrating an ethnic past were built in highly diverse and highly multi-ethnic environments. The governmental monuments were built on hills above cities to symbolically rule them. Several were highly ahistorical and did not fit into the environment at all. In contrast, local initiatives were built, or planned to be built, as in Munkácsevó, in the historic centers of towns and celebrated figures who were important and significant in the local memory culture of the local elites. Only in one place in Munkácsevó were the governmental sponsored and the local initiatives identical. The reception of these monuments cannot be explained in a simple ethnic framework, however. In Nyitra, it was the conservative Catholics protested on an ideological and religious grounds. In Zemun, pragmatism prevailed, even though one would expect heavy Serbian and Croatian opposition. In Munkácsevó, the local Lithuanian elite supported Magyar nationalism because it sincerely believed in its modernizing agenda, and the local Jews opposed the whole story, not because of nationalism, but because of their different reception and understanding of modernity and of let's say, important social values. A pure ethno-nationalistic conflict can be proven only in the case of Brașov, so 1 in 7 or 1 in 5 multi-ethnic locations. Shortly about the afterlife. The three monuments which found themselves after the First World War in Czechoslovakia, so in Děvín, Nyitra and Munkácsevó, because what is today the western part of Ukraine became Czechoslovak territory in the interwar period. The Czechoslovak army and Czechoslovak authorities destroyed all these monuments without exception immediately after the takeover. Even the Maria Theresia monument was destroyed, even though it was built not by the Hungarian state but by locals, and it represented local values. Since it was associated with the Habsburgs, it was destroyed immediately. In Munkácsevó, surprisingly, a few years ago, the monument was re-erected on the initiative of a locally born Magyar-American millionaire, a guy who, this is now a Ukrainian town with a little Hungarian Magyar minority. There was a Magyar guy, so a Soviet citizen of Magyar ethnicity, who migrated to the United States either in the 80s or early 90s, became millionaire of whatever business, and then he sponsored a monument, so he practically rebuilt the monument. I guess that he practically bribed the local council and to give him the permission to re-erect this monument. In Brașov, the monument was often vandalized immediately after its inauguration. We absolutely don't know who the vandals were, but most likely these were local Romanian or Saxon youth who were unhappy with the monument. It was vandalized in 1913, so before the First World War. A Romanian terrorist deployed the bomb and it was seriously damaged. A terrorism is not an overstatement. This guy, a few months later, tried to assassinate the bishop, who was, in his eyes, in the service of the Hungarian government. So, and he was not a local one, but someone from Bessarabia, so Russian Empire. So this Romanian, he had an extremely interesting life. He was then involved in jewelry business in Marseille and in various parts of the world. So he had an extremely interesting life, and one of these, his deeds was to bomb the Brașov monument. It was seriously damaged, and the storm ultimately fell on the monument a few months before the First World War broke out. And then it was further demolished by the Romanian army once Romanians took over the monument. But the monument to Johannes Hontéros still stands, so it survived 40 years of Romanian communism, even though it was dedicated to Lutheran theologian. Oddly enough, in Zemun, so what is today in Belgrade, the monument still stands. All the Magyar signs were removed immediately after the Yugoslav takeover, but the Yugoslav authorities thought that this monument will show the victory over Hungary and over Austria-Hungary in the First World War. So they kept the monument, and then they used it as a fire tower, and this is now an atelier. We can find some exhibitions there. It is also a local landmark, and people have no idea why it was constructed, but they associate it with John Hunyadi, so Janko Sibinyani. And it is really a local landmark. So if you Google Zemun, I'm sure that in the 5 pictures you see first, you will see this monument first. In Pannonhalme, the monastery still stands, but no one ever cares because it's so unimportant. And the funny thing is in Pusztasel, here initiatives to build a proper village or town nearby failed, as I explained. But oddly enough, communist Hungary started to use this for its own purposes. And after the transition to democracy, a park was built nearby, even though every historian knows that this is historical nonsense. But a national heritage park, a sort of amusement and national kitsch combined, was built there, and you can engage in various activities as folklore museums and local museums, and so quite odd combination of things. And it works. It is attended each year by tens of thousands, perhaps even more. I can recall a memory from the late 1990s. My high school was connected with the Dutch high school, and some Dutch high school students came to us for a visit, and my school had the idea to bring them there to show them the genuine Hungarian soul, and they were taken, and I guess they had no idea why they were taken there. But still, it works, and Hungarians, this story tells, think that this is something worth to show, and this is perhaps something which represents Hungarianness today, perhaps. On the long run, the 5 monuments on the peripheries had obviously no chance to commemorate the Magyar national past because they were lost to Hungary 22 years after their construction during the First World War. And the 2 inner monuments were no success story either. In Pannonhalme, the monastery, it remained insignificant, and this one became important approximately a century later in a very different social context. The story indicates the limits of governmental actions of late 19th century Hungary. Even though the power of liberal and nationalist Hungary by that time seemed solid and uncontested. This story, in my understanding, is that if a government does not negotiate with local elites, it disregards local interests, then it will certainly fail. And no matter how strong a center is, if there is no interaction between the local level and the national level, then only by accident can it yield results, as it was in Munkachevo and nowhere else. Thank you so much for your...
I would like to thank Dr. Varga for a very elaborate presentation on monuments. It was not only interesting, it's also nice to hear that we're not alone with problems with monuments only in Slovenia, but that they exist also elsewhere. So I have some questions myself, but first I would like to ask audience if there are maybe any questions to Dr. Varga.
I was saying the monuments are very different. There are some columns, and in Zemun it looks like a church. Was this also planned from this guy who was planning that, or was this? Most of the monuments are statues and with some strange things, and this in Puszta is very unusual. One sitting on ancient Greece, but Is this also somehow planned? The different structures, some are actually buildings and some are only columns?
Well, this one, Panorama, it has a kind of church feeling, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, in a way, adjusted. However, the monks, the Benedictine monks, were also unhappy with that, because this is built in Neo-Renaissance style. And Neo-Renaissance, so in the 15th, 16th century, that was just the worst period of their existence at all, because that was the Ottoman Habsburg war zone. And they also had, so the Ottomans conquered the monastery for a few years. So that was the zenith of their history at all. They wanted to have neo-Romanesque, but it was refused. All other structures, no, here this example, I don't think it's a church. I think it's rather it's a tower.
It's a tower.
It's a tower, and I think it also makes some sense because it is built amidst a ruin of a castle. But the other ones are just columns with some quite average figures, either Arpad or an ancient Magyar warrior, or that Turul, that mythical bird of the Magyars. So the guy who was commissioned to design them was a very, very average architect. He built a few houses in Budapest. I checked him in the huge dictionary of Hungarian artists, and the entry is like this.
But I mean, if I may add, at the time, these technologies of the monuments that you were showing, they were all, valid technologies for the monuments. You could pick one or the other, and actually such kind of a tower is quite typical to be built on a hill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is actually probably the best one out of, more elaborate out of the, let's say.
Elaborate, but are you sure the best one?
No, more elaborate, most elaborate. The others are like this one, or, I mean, yeah, the guy had no fantasy, and the budget was also quite limited. And also this Kármán acknowledged that the quality of the monuments does not really matter, they have to be there.
And, well, apparently it has to be vertical.
Yes. yes. But this has yes, Marco, but this has a very obvious explanation. These were built on hills. Yes. So his idea was that people, if they walk nearby, or if they go on train, yes, then you can see there from far distance. This was his idea. This guy was in his 60s or 70s by the time. He was quite an old person. And it is obvious that he did not want a large engagement with the monuments. So the reason why in Mukachevo he refused to locate that on the main square of the town was that he just writes that he did not want the monument to be used during the Saturday fair by peasants who would store their rotten cabbage on the monument. So for this reason, the monuments shall be put on high hills where people can either observe them from the distance or organized trips, like high schools, like associations, can go there, and this is a kind of pilgrimage. So this was an absolute conscious choice not to put them into the cities, and if it is on a hill, it makes sense to have it vertical because it draws the attention. This is old-fashioned, very old-fashioned understanding of nationalism, that it is top-down, literally top-down, that we, the middle class or nationalist leaders, govern people, and practically we will say who will have the entrance to visit these monuments, because if you are just an ordinary person, we will not walk there on your own, but we will organize these festivities and all the social structures which are associated with that.
Like a sacred trip.
Exactly.
But he was probably fond of German monuments.
Yes,
at that
absolutely.
time.
Yes. He traveled throughout Italy and Germany and said, "Oh, we don't have these kind of things." So this is the case.
No, but in Germany you have them on the border. On the line you have a
Yes,
monument,
yes,
you
yes.
have a thing from France. Or
Yes.
Yes. That was probably
Yes,
here.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Še kakšno vprašanje? You know what I was wondering about? Were they always directly ordered or there were competitions?
Order.
Ordered.
Order.
So also in aesthetics he had a perfect taste, he knew what to take,
Yes.
in all kinds of matters he knew what to do.
Yes, he consulted with the sculptors, yes.
And he just ordered them.
Yeah, he wrote actually the signs.
He also wrote what should be written on the monument.
Yes, well, these were only, these speeches were short, but there was a kind of a festive document which was placed in the document.
Yeah, also inside?
Yes,
Yeah.
and he wrote that as well. He was project manager, he did everything.
But that I would say it's quite rare, that somebody would really make such a net and be so involved. Because also here usually what we have are civic monuments, you have to have a civic action, and here
But this is not civic action,
it's
this
very
is top
different.
down, quite directly.
I wonder about, it was top down, it was ordered by the state, and they gave him full powers to manage the whole project. But when he started with the project, did the politicians try to intervene or to shape this project or to
Were the
guide
colleagues
it
envy?
somehow?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, not the colleagues, because during this millennial year, everyone could have unlimited chance to involve into these matters, because there were so many jobs, these kind of jobs. But some locations were envy. So some municipalities, major ones of course, were lobbied to get one of these monuments, because this was also kind of prestige. So the government would come us and show how important we are for the nation. And so in Transylvania, the local settlers protested that Tallinn will build a monument in Brasov for the Saxons, which is a historical whatever. Why not we, the true Magyars of Transylvania, get the monument? And said, sorry guys, we're not on the border.
But if other monuments were obtained with competitions, was there demanded that the sculptors and the architects, that they be Hungarians? Because in Slovenia, when you had a competition there around the turn of the century, in the competition, it was written also, I know for Czechs, it was written that the sculpture has to be Slovene. Was it the same in the Hungary? Do you maybe know?
It was not even needed.
It was not even needed.
No, it was obvious.
Selbstverständlich.
I'm not sure, but what I noticed is also, I think the third slide that you were showing, there was a sculpture that is called György Zala, but he was from Lindova,
Yeah.
and he was called Georg Müller, by his birth name, and then he changed when he started to study in Hungary.
Yes, but this is a perfect Hungarian. This is
But it was obviously very, very, very often that artists were changing names
Yes.
into Hungarian. Because it was happening everywhere, but Hungarian.
Magyar nationalism was extremely inclusive. Everyone who subscribed, everyone who said that I'm for Magyar nationalism, then he was accepted as a Magyar. This was beyond question.
Because really a lot of people are changing. Not one,
Yeah, quite
not
many.
some, but it's
In
a
the
trend.
middle classes, among intellectuals, quite many, yes.
Even cardinals.
Yes, culture, yes. In the church, in the arts, in sciences, there were extremely many who changed, some of them kept their genuine names, some of them changed into a Magyar name, but once there were two prerequisites. First, use the Magyar language, second, being loyal to the state. And that was all. Everyone could be Magyar, that was very easy. Magyar nationalism was very inclusive. This is the reason why Jews were also accepted very, very easily.
If they followed everything, it was...
Yes, no Hasidim Jews, because they speak the Yiddish and have their weird looking coat. If they change to Magyar, if they get proper European stuff, and they became proponents of the Magyar nationalism, they were beyond question accepted. also that János Fadus, who carved the Maria Theresia monument, he became one of the most celebrated sculptors. He was also from Bratislava, from a German-speaking environment. No one cared.
Yeah, but they had to present themselves as Hungarians, otherwise they would not be accepted.
Yes. So it is, no racial understanding of nation was present.
Okay, I have a question that goes beyond what you presented. Were there, besides this state finance, 7 monuments project, were there any other initiatives, for instance, led by local councils or voluntary associations that actually materialized in monuments in this year?
Well, in this year, hardly any, because they realized that that the time was short. But some of them, like this Maria Theresia monument, was built a year later, but it was officially still the millennial achievement, millennial contribution of the city. In Cluj, Kolozsvár, today in Romania, on the main square you still see the King Matthias Corvinus statue. That was also designed by the same guy as Fadus. Perhaps a few years later, it was also still a millennial contribution, the government. Just needed some more time because they were very costly.
A kind of an alternative notion of Hungarians presented by locals.
Well, very Arpad and St. Stephen, they were made so extremely popular that Magyar-led local councils had nothing against. Perhaps they chose someone else. So, in fact, they rarely chose Arpad, but because it was so much in the dim past. But quite many actually then chose the local heroes, who may be even a king, so a person of national importance. But that exactly just reinforced the importance of Cluj for the Hungarian nation, that they portrayed themselves as the second capital of Hungary, and for this reason they chose a king who was born there in Cluj, who was the most glorious king of Hungary in the Middle Ages. That's a perfect choice for local city council. And in the next 20 years, monuments started to mushroom. And the most celebrated figure was Lajos Kossuth, the leader of the 1848 revolution. 100 monuments were built. And these were all built by local initiatives and by local money, because the government, of course, could not be involved because of his problematic connotations with the Habsburg monarchy. So Hungary caught up with Germany and Bohemia within these 20 years. And this was the moment which opened the box of Pandora, and then in 20 years monuments were in, well, not in every village, but in most towns. It was a sign of modernity as well to have a proper public monument.
Če nima nihče več vprašanja, it seems no more questions. So thank you again, and until the next time.
Yeah, thank you so much.